This video contains flashing lights and spoilers for Doors and Grace. Holy shit, this game is great. Grace is a Roblox game made by the Fartering Few. It's a game about going through doors and avoiding entities. It's heavily inspired by Doors, Pressure, and wait, Pizza Tower? I have become addicted to this game in the past few weeks, and it seems I'm not the only one to have fallen down the trap that is this game, as the player count has exploded pretty much right when the game released. All that for something that can be experienced in under an hour. But how did it find so much staying power in only a few days? Doors is a 2021 roguelike about, well, doors. It became and is still incredibly popular inside and outside of the Roblox community. The entire point of the game is to go as far as possible while avoiding entities that are hunting you down. Entities being the enemies you encounter during your run. Now, that doesn't really explain what makes Doors so good, but the magic of the game comes down to how stressful it makes you feel. Doors isn't horrific in the traditional sense. It isn't that scary. The actual strength of the game comes from its oppressive ambience and how it stresses you. Let me explain. One of the main entities from Doors is called Rush. It's probably the most important enemy in the game, as it pretty much defines how you approach the game. Its whole thing is that it announces itself by screeching before running towards the player, killing them instantly. This entity forces the player to stop whatever they're doing and change their approach on the spot. In order to avoid dying to Rush, the player needs to hide, either in a corner or in a closet. This, alongside the fact that Rush breaks the lights after its passing, leaves a lasting impact on the player. Combine this with the other entities in the game, and the player will become paranoid. There are also other entities in this game that emphasize distress. There's Seek, which is basically a boss fight that goes through around 7 to 10 rooms of parkour around fallen objects. There's also Eyes, but it's probably the easiest entity in the whole game. You just have to not look at it in order to not get damaged. I'm sure this won't be relevant later on at all. But back to the whole stress thing, I think this aspect of the game is what made me love it so much. Overcoming the stress that takes you over across every enemy encounter and finding joy in the small things the game throws at you to keep you going feels weirdly comforting. And it's what made the game feel so special to me. But I'm getting off track. The point I'm making is that the slower paced nature of Doors gives the player time to wonder about what is going to happen, and so adds an unmatched ambience to the game that is emphasized by the hotel the game is set in. Grace takes the whole concept I've been talking about for the past few minutes and completely flips it on its head. At first glance, Grace is incredibly similar to Doors. You do open a lot of doors and avoid a lot of entities in a roguelike format, but the similarities pretty much end there. When you first drop down the vault in the lobby, you start off in the tutorial area. This is the place where you first experiment with Grace's movement system. I'll get back to it later, but the only thing you need to know is that you can sprint, slide, crouch, and jump. This is already a fairly weird game design choice, as other Doors-like games usually don't have a movement system at all, only having a crouch button and occasionally a jump button. The only other game in this format I could find with a sprint button is Rooms and Doors, another game that Grace takes inspiration from. The tutorial section is, unsurprisingly, the easiest part of the game. Endless brick corridors, rooms filled with levers and kickable doors. The rest of the game visually stays like this. It doesn't really focus on environments because it doesn't need to. That simplicity offers a greater focus on the actual gameplay of the game. In Grace, you start off with a lantern and a flashlight. Item management in this game is basically non-existent, compared to doors where it's one of the most important parts of the gameplay. The lantern is obviously the best choice, but the flashlight still has some uses, and you can also spin it, which is certified epic and rad and dope. Grace has 8 entities, and pretty much all of them are inspired in some way by entities from doors. The first entity you meet is at door 14 during the tutorial. His name is Carnation, a pink eyeball that chases you through the rooms. Carnation is pretty much exactly like Rush, but the method of fighting off Carnation is different. To avoid Rush, you need to hide in a closet or somewhere where it can't see you. With Carnation, you need to hide in a hole or an hiding spot a few rooms ahead of where he spawns. This removes the need for another system of interaction, simplifying, once again, Grace's gameplay and keeping you on the move instead of breaking the action by forcing the player to hide in a closet. The way Carnation is telegraphed is also very different from Rush. Rush is signaled by flickering lights and it screeching as it comes toward you. Carnation is telegraphed instead by flashing your screen with pink and playing a sound only when coming extremely close to the player. This makes Carnation's attack a lot clearer than Rush's, since they have different purposes. Rush's telegraphing is meant to confuse the player, making themselves ask if an entity is really coming or if they're just confused. Instead, Carnation clearly tells the player that they're coming, avoiding confusion. After a few rooms, the player comes to the first real zone of the game, separated by a safe room. Safe rooms end and start the timers. When the timer ends, Goatman appears. Goatman isn't an entity you'll encounter much, but it insta-kills you. You can avoid it by flashing your flashlight at it, but otherwise it's pretty much an insta-kill. The first zone is pretty much like the tutorial. You only encounter Carnation, but after the second safe room, you start seeing a new entity. His name is Slight. Slight is like Eyes, except a lot worse in the context of this game. You have 2 chances with him. The first time he gets you, a white light and random flashing words appear on your screen. This isn't a big hiccup, but you need to be careful, as the second time he hits you, you instantly die. You can avoid Slight by not looking at it. He emits a dark blue glow, so he's pretty easy to spot and avoid, just like Carnation. But given you are either running or sliding when near him, it's very easy for you to get caught in its gaze. Also, it doesn't instantly attack you, rather, it very quickly follows you, so you can avoid it if you're careful enough. The next safe room is where the game really starts, in my opinion. It introduces 2 entities, Slugfish and Hyde. Starting with Slugfish, he is easily the most interesting one of the 2. He attacks like Carnation, signaling with a white flash before rushing at you, but with 2 key differences. First off, he attacks only 3 seconds after his telegraph, making for a much more involved encounter. Secondly, he has a physical presence. To avoid Slugfish, you have to go to the sides of the corridor, hugging the walls to avoid its eye-filled mouth. I feel like this tiny gameplay difference changes the whole dynamic between the player and the entities. Usually, the entities in something like doors or pressure are a lot more spirit-like, or metaphorical in a way, as you don't have to directly touch them to be hurt. But Slugfish's attack feels a lot more real, as you have to clearly and physically avoid his hitbox. I know I'm looking way too deep into this tiny Roblox game, but when I first encountered the Slugfish, it genuinely surprised me to see this new take on such an iconic enemy archetype. I'm not even gonna lie, Hyde is the easiest enemy in the whole game. You can literally just run past him. You're supposed to hide from him, like behind a wall or on an obstacle, but it's quicker to just go around him and get to the next room. It's not even that hard too. He only poses a real threat when you're in a lever room. The next non-extremely easy and you can just run past it enemy in the game is Hyde, and he is the reason for most of my deaths. He acts exactly like Slight, using the same earth system, but you have to look at him instead. I really like this entity though, as once again, he changes the way you play the game and is totally fair, since his attack is predictable and easily avoidable if you take your time. But the deeper you go in the corridor and the less time you have. Not literally. More in a you have 5,000 entities chasing you and you have to run away kind of way. So this entity becomes really hard, especially because you can't see which type of door you're going through. For example, if it's a broken door, you have to kick it from behind, so it can make you lose a lot of time if you're not careful. The last two entities are easily my favorites. They generally feel so different, yet they're pretty much the same. Dozer is easily the most iconic entity of the game. He's a smiley face that kills you if you do not crouch while staying still. This means that you have to stop everything and obey him. Dozer is basically a spiced up version of A90 from Doors, but I think Dozer does a way better job at involving the player than A90 for one reason. Dozer appears 3 seconds before attacking, meaning you have time to move out of the way and set up for his attack, compared to A90, which is almost instant and relies only on reflex. But this also makes Dozer more threatening, since you never know when he will strike. The other entity the 5th safe room brings is Sorrow, and it's not technically an entity, but I do not care. Whenever Sorrow appears, it makes it rain blood, and you need to stop in your track and hide under a platform or an obstacle to survive. Both Sorrow and Dozer kill you instantly, but they make you do two separate actions that don't contradict each other while achieving the same goal. Sorrow makes you stop, but it usually appears when no entities are around. Dozer, on the opposite, prefers to appear while Coronation or Slugfish is attacking the player, changing how you approach these entities, thus creating new situations that could never happen in another game like Doors. The thing to take away from Grace's entity design is that they're simple on purpose, as that allows the game to not confuse the player and mix and match them to offer an exciting and fresh experience. The second most important part of Grace is the movement, as this is, after all, a very fast-paced and movement-based game. You can sprint, crouch, slide, and jump. This is enough to help you go fast, but the movement system gets really complex when you look deeper into it. First off, you can slide faster by sliding downstairs. This is probably the easiest and most effective way of speeding up, but controlling your slide to not end up in a wall is also essential and takes a lot of practice. There's also tripping. You can achieve whatever this is by sliding into a wall and jumping. This already allows for skipping rooms and avoiding Slugfish and Slide. You can also speed up rapidly by crouching and uncrouching, allowing for a lot of speedrun potential, but not as important as tripping or sliding for regular players. I think it's the mix of parkour and entities that makes Grace so unique. Like I said in the beginning of the video, it takes the concept of Doors and flips its core idea on its head to offer a new and unique experience that's way more like an arcade game than an horror game, while still maintaining horror elements. Even if you've never played Doors or even Roblox, I strongly suggest that you try out this game, because it's something only a Roblox game and no other platform could offer. Thank you so much for watching. Like, I know this is only my second video, but it really means a lot to me that people like you like to hear me ramble about random games. This year, as I'm recording this, it's January 4th, 2025, 3:22 in the morning. But this year, I will try to be a lot more productive, and I already have a lot of ideas on what games I want to cover, and even franchises and more personal stuff. On that note, you can find me and all of my socials on my website in the description. And once again, thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully see you next time.